As the weather warms and Russian forces become more active on the ground and in the air following a long winter hibernation, Moscow's objectives for the fifth year of wider war are becoming clearer. The main aims of the 700,000-strong Russian force in Ukraine are to advance toward the left bank of the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine while also pushing toward the twin-free cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. The former objective would consolidate Russian control over most of the Ukrainian Black Sea coast. The latter objective could result in full Russian control of Donetsk Oblast. Both are much easier planned than done. Ukraine's southeastern counteroffensive has stalled any Russian advance toward the Dnipro, and Ukrainian forces' stiff defense of two key towns, Kostiantynivka and Lyman, is impeding the planned march on Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. But a long spring-to-fall fighting season looms. Russian field armies are once again mobilizing heavy forces that mostly idled for much of the past year. Russian aerial bombardment is intensifying along the most critical sectors. And while the Ukrainians are killing and maiming more Russians than ever and thoroughly wrecking the season's initial Russian mechanized assaults, Russian troops and vehicles still greatly outnumber Ukrainian troops and vehicles. Plans are just that, plans. The coming months could make a mockery of Russian objectives or reveal the same objectives as unnecessarily conservative. The only thing anyone can say with any certainty is that the fighting will be brutal, and losses will be painful for both sides. The war in Ukraine has a seasonal rhythm. The Russians push hardest, often with mechanized forces, when the weather is warm and the ground is dry. When the weather is cold and wet, infantry take over, creeping across the wide, contested gray zone in order to destabilize Ukrainian positions and potentially even capture a city or two. Last winter, Russian infantry succeeded in capturing Pokrovsk and neighboring Mirnorad in Donetsk Oblast in the east, seeming opening a southern path toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, 50 kilometers to the north. They also marched westward across Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia oblasts in the southeast, ultimately capturing Huliaipol and setting conditions for a future push toward Orikhiv, the last major Ukrainian strongpoint between the Russians and Zaporizhzhia city on the Dnipro's left bank 80 kilometers west of the Gray Zone. But the Russians suffered tens of thousands of casualties marching toward and eventually capturing Pokrovsk and Mirnorad. Their exhaustion is evident in the sharp slowdown in Russian assaults since the two settlements fell late last year. Kostiantynivka holds, and in the southeast, a Ukrainian counteroffensive timed to take advantage of a collapse in Russia's frontline communications not only halted the Russian march on Orikhiv, it reversed it. The Russians are falling back in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia oblasts at the time plans call for them to lunge forward. That doesn't mean the Russians won't resume their slow grind across Ukraine in the coming months. The Russian Air Force has escalated its aerial bombardment of Ukrainian positions around Kramatorsk and Sloviansk in the east and west of Huliaipol in the southeast, aiming to weaken the Ukrainian defense ahead of renewed Russian offensives along both axes. Mapper Clement Moulin observed 4,000 Russian airstrikes along the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk axis since 2024 and 900 Russian airstrikes around Huliaipol in the same time frame. A follow-on Russian ground offensive is taking shape in the east. The current offensive actions are slowly increasing from Lyman to Pokrovsk, Moulin noted. The first few Russian mechanized assaults toward Lyman ended in disaster for the Russians, with heavy losses in vehicles and personnel. But the Russians spent much of 2025 replenishing its depleted armored forces. It's possible there are now more tanks and other armored vehicles on the Russian side of the Gray Zone than at any point in the 50-month wider war. All that is to say, the Russian pressure on Sloviansk and Kramatorsk will only increase. In the southeast, the Russians must first defeat the Ukrainian counteroffensive before they can resume their westward march. Analyst Andrew Perpetua is skeptical that it'll happen anytime soon, although not for a lack of violence. Overall, Russia's plans in Zaporizhzhia are being blocked. Perpetua wrote, "Their advance on Orikhiv's eastern side has slowed a lot because of Ukrainian counterattacks and strong defenses. If Russia wants to focus its summer campaign on the Dnipro riverbank as planned, they would need to capture Orikhiv within about a month." Perpetua wrote recently, "That's not going to happen. More likely, they'll spend the summer trying to take Orikhiv, which might fail and never reach their yearly goal of capturing the bank. If the most optimistic predictions for the Ukrainians come true, the Russians may make only limited progress toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk in the east and Orikhiv in the south. In that case, the Kremlin's objectives for 2026 could roll into 2027 as the wider war grinds on. Ukraine has become the first country to scale the use of remotely operated interceptor drones capable of long-distance strikes. Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov said April 23rd, adding that the systems are already being used to destroy aerial targets in combat. A year ago, through Brave One, we initiated the development and testing of remote control technology for interceptor drones. Today, we have a confirmed result shooting down targets at distances of hundreds and thousands of kilometers, Fedorov wrote on social media. According to Fedorov, the technology represents a new standard in air defense and demonstrates the rapid implementation of battlefield innovation. More than 10 defense manufacturers have already integrated the remote control capability into their interceptor drone systems, he said. The defense minister added that the capability allows drone operators to control interceptor drones from protected environments in cities such as Kyiv and Lviv, or even from abroad instead of operating near the front. Remote control, Fedorov said, increases the effectiveness of interception, minimizes risks for operators, and allows capabilities to be scaled without being tied to the front. He added that Ukraine is moving toward its goals of 100% detection and no less than 95% neutralization of enemy air targets. The effort to develop and scale remote-controlled interceptor drones is being carried out under Brave One, a government-backed platform to accelerate defense tech development. Launched in 2023, the initiative promotes coordination and collaboration between defense industry stakeholders. Ukraine's defense industry demonstrated the capability of remote control with a record-breaking interceptor drone launch earlier this month, during which Ukrainian drone manufacturer Wild Hornets carried out a flight over more than 1,240 miles, 2,000 kilometers. The operator was based in northern Ukraine, the company said, and remotely controlled the Sting interceptor drone using its Hornet Vision Control system, which is now being deployed at scale.